Okay, good evening, everyone. I believe everyone's back. So, tonight's chapter is from Catherine Thanos' book, The Truth of This Life, and the chapter title, Not Moving is the Way. There's a lot in this chapter, so I thought I'd just take a minute to address the title. Um, Catherine's teacher, Reb Anderson, seems like I mention him almost every Dharma talk I do here, but that's just the way it is. He talked about how, he was very mean-spirited toward himself in being too rigid in his sitting when he first started, and I was like that too. So it's very important to invoke the spirit of generosity, and we want to kind of stay with things as much as we can in a compassionate and receptive way, like the pain sitting in Zazen, but we don't want to take a hard attitude towards ourselves and say, I'm not going to move no matter what. Very experienced teachers, when they were trying to guide me when I was very young, would say, it's okay to be comfortable. You don't want to be, you can actually damage your sciatic nerve if you sit for hours and hours refusing to move. So we want to be flexible that way. So in reading this chapter, I thought it was very interesting, and it seemed essentially the spirit of it is about the practice that we learn, don't grasp at our experience during Zazen and don't turn away. Be present to it with an open, flexible state of mind. Suzuki Roshi used to say a state of mental pliancy, or being with compliant mind. And in the spirit of generosity, the first paramita, that's a spirit of unconditional acceptance and kindness and compassion. So she starts out here and she says, when I was younger in practice, I longed for someone to tell me what to do. I thought there was a way and that I just couldn't find it. Now, years later, I know that this practice is the way. I know that practice is the process of realizing there is no way, that each of us is the way. Therein lies the mystery. So, yeah, and that was my experience too when I was very young. I started in my 20s, early 20s even, sitting Zazen. And there were lots of patterns in me that I wasn't fully aware of, but, lots of self-alienation, anger, repressed energy, depressed energy. I learned later in my psychology studies that depression is like your energy being pressed down. So what we want to do is be aware of those patterns, and we kind of lighten up so we can fully enter our body and mind in our direct experience. Lots of fear and isolation was there in many of us younger people when we first started, and that in itself leads to that kind of self-hatred in some ways, being really too hard on ourselves and being mean-spirited about our sitting. And many people quit because it was just too hard, because they were being so hard on themselves and they didn't really have the tools to recognize why that was happening. So we use the practice of generosity towards ourselves and others to gradually allow these patterns of self-clinging to emerge into our conscious awareness, with an attitude of acceptance. And even though we don't really talk about mindfulness so much in Japanese, and which is fine with me, because there are aspects of mindfulness now that become so commercialized. But basically, the best definition of mindfulness I can really express is it's awareness of our present experience with an attitude of acceptance. So in that sense, we're very much about mindfulness practice, being ourselves knowingly, mindfully. So, there's the importance of Sangha here too, that that compassionate, generous, and patient attitude that we have with ourselves, we can really learn to share that with each other. And even as young people that we were so messed up in so many ways, there was a real bonding there, that we were together as Sanghas, especially when we were in the monastery. We had periods of silence, but there was that togetherness there. So we learned that, and it helped us get through a lot of the pain of being young and trying to adjust to a different ancient practice that culturally was quite alien to our conditioning, our early conditioning. I wanted to read something. She quotes on page 83, Catherine quotes the Zen poet Jane Hirschfield. Jane Hirschfield, I knew her many years ago, and she became a quite well-known poet. Some of you may have heard of her. And so this is quoting Jane. Jane says, "You aren't doing anything in meditation but offering up your attention, and yet somehow doing nothing allows mind, body, emotion, the rain on the roof to come together and reveal themselves. It's as if you were to sit very quietly in the woods. After a while, the animals begin to emerge, and you see the full amplitude of life that is in fact already here. The intention is to live your whole life in that kind of awareness, instead of living in a haze of distraction, hope, and fear as we usually do." So she starts off, Jane was starting off, the first thing was, by not consciously trying to do anything except be, you aren't doing anything but offering up your attention. So later in this chapter, Catherine's talking about taking the backward step and just, offering our attention. To me, that's kind of like allowing our attention to fall back or relax back into our source, into our being, or a resting of our attention in our source, in our presence, our awareness of being present, always here and always now. So that is the backward step. And, the thing is, most of the time our attention is directed outward towards objects, but we can't really know our source. We can't really know our Buddha nature in the same way we know other objects of experience or objects of experience. We know our thoughts, our feelings, our perceptions, but we can't know ourself, our whole self, in that same way, because it doesn't have any objective qualities. It's not perceivable or describable. So one exercise I was given early on was, if you stand up, try and take a step toward yourself, not toward your experience, not toward your feelings, thoughts, perceptions, but your consciousness. If you take a step forward, do you come any closer to yourself? Or if you take a step backward, do you take a step farther away from yourself? So it's a way of experiencing how our being is not something we can remove or attain. It's what's ever present. And if we really allow ourselves to experience, enter our body and mind, like Catherine says, on page 85, she says, "One of the extraordinary things about Suzuki Roshi was how ordinary he was. It takes time to be willing to be that ordinary, to walk in the direction of Buddha. The practice of sitting here, letting in our fears, our doubts, our resistances, our denial, is walking in the direction of becoming complete. In addition to watching the contents of mind, we watch the nature of mind, our mind objects, and they're flowing like the tide." I think of the flow of our mind objects as the flow of impermanence. It's the flow of our experience. It's the flow of our life force. It's the flow of our nature. And it's what we are. So to explore, or to really enter that deep exploration of our experience, of our life, one example is, we can look at our sensations. Notice how they're always moving. Do sensations have any size? Is there any edge to a sensation? Notice how they're always moving. There's all these different textures, hot, cold, intense, dull, sharp, oppressive, light, joyful. All these different qualities of our sensations. But where's the actual entity? Where's the actual thing of a sensation? If we experience sensation, if we experience perceptions and thoughts, we're experiencing what they're made of. And, our actual experience, if we pay attention, is that they arise in us. They're in our consciousness, in our awareness. So if we fall back, our attention falls back, relaxes back, we don't try to grasp thoughts about our experience. Where's the division between ourself and our experience? So Thich Nhat Hanh says, once we realize that we are the awareness that has no boundaries, then fear ends. When we realize that deeply enough, our fear goes away because there's nothing outside to be afraid of. And by deep exploration, we can come to that realization that everything is lovable, everything is acceptable. If we can't find, the not finding can be the finding of acceptance, that unconditional acceptance. And that's Buddha's teaching. It's still kind of a mystery to me, but the deep engagement with the intimacy we share with all beings is liberation, is what relieves suffering. So she says, we don't just watch the content of our mind, but explore the nature of mind. Here, mind, she doesn't mean the thinking mind. It's the nature of mind in Buddhist, teaching is most of the time, it's the same as Buddha nature. It's the same as consciousness, awareness, infinite presence. The nature of how we know, the nature of that by which we know our experience in terms of being aware of it, witnessing it, or experiencing it. So what could be more important than knowing the nature of that by which we know our experience? So if we explore our experience of our being, for one thing, it's ever present. When have we not ever been present? Every moment of our life. We're here, we're now. Our experiences all come and go, but the experience of just being aware, the experience of being present, the awareness of being present has always been the same, no matter what we were experiencing at any time of our life, when we were young, growing up, or as an old person. The experience of being aware is always the same experience. And that's the nature of our shared being. So we say the nature of our being is ever present. It's boundless, without limits. I still remind myself when I go outside and try to comprehend how a limitless, boundless space is. That's our experience. There's no limits. And it's stainless. That experience of being aware of our being, of our Buddha nature, is never moved or changed or conditioned by any experience that we're thinking that we're experienced by ourselves. And the other quality of our being is that it's shared. It's a shared being. So we share our being with all other beings. Suzuki Roshi had a statement about breathing. He said that when we breathe in, the air from the outer world comes into our inner world. And when we breathe out, the air goes from our inner world into the outer world. And we say inner world and outer world, but the inner world and the outer world are both boundless, without limits. So when we breathe, he says, we're just like a swinging door. And when we say I breathe, the I is extra. Actually, there's just breath coming in and out. And so on page 86, Catherine says, once a teacher told me, do your job, but take yourself out of the situation. I think what she means there is to, fully enter the doing, but take Reb's teaching that we never do anything by ourselves. We're doing everything together with all beings, like Buddha said. I and all beings together attain the way. Don't get stuck in that idea of being a doer. And then it's so much easier because when we draw on and receive the power of all beings together, it melts the root of our resistance. It melts the root of our ego. And it's much easier to move through life with a peace and stillness that we can find at the heart of every experience, because that being is always with us. And Thich Nhat Hanh had a saying that the world of suffering and discrimination is filled with the light of the rising sun. That, the sun rises and shines its light on everything. It lights up the whole sky. And a friend of mine who practiced with Thich Nhat Hanh for many years was once having a conversation with him in the early days, when he didn't have like 1,000 people every time he got together with people. They really complimented him on that saying, the world of suffering and discrimination is filled with the light of the rising sun. And he said, well, it's our being that lights up the sun. We have to be present for the sun to light up the sky, because the sun arises just like our experience arises in us. The sun arises every morning in our being. So when we realize that deeply enough, we find the peace and stillness at the heart of every experience, She said, make a big space, allow a big space in our mind and body so we can feel our heart deeply and not deny it, and share it with others. So I've been talking quite a while. Let's have discussion. Thank you.
Well, I don't have much to say, Roger, except that every time I hear one of your talks, I just always feel much more peaceful. So thank you.
I do when I hear your talks too.
your talk, Suzanne. Something, a combination of something Anna said and something you said, reminded me of, I believe it was Dogen, who said, take that backward step and shine the light inward. And that always made me think of shikantaza, of zazen, just sitting. Because if we let it, zazen shines that light that illuminates everything, the things that we want to see, the things we don't want to see. But they're all part of the one inner and outer world that we inhabit. So I think that's the challenge of zazen. That's it sometimes could be the scary part of zazen, even though Dogen also said it was the gate of ease and joy. Sometimes it feels like the gate with the spikes on that I'm sitting on. Those gates that people have to keep like birds and animals out of their yard, they have like these spikes on. And sometimes zazen feels like that, and sometimes it feels like the kind of easy swinging gate of ease and joy. The sun illuminates all of it, and zazen illuminates all of it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Gato. I was reminded that Trungpa Rinpoche also talked about the sun a lot in his talks. He had a phrase about the great eastern sun, rising, and how if we open to it, like you were saying, then we can feel that light embracing both the suffering and the discriminations, as well as our joy and peace, and that the energy kind of mix is all together. And so there's a transforming power there that I don't know if we can really say much about it except to experience it, that it melts the root of our self-clinging. And its nature is contentment and peace. Thanks.
Thank you for your talk, Shikan. I had a question. It was a bit of a question about practice. I think I sometimes forget that you just said it in the talk that we are the practice. And sometimes I just think of the practice as the practice. Like I had the flu and I was kind of knocked out for about a month. It took me about a month and a half to get my energy back. And when I was in bed and I couldn't do anything but lay there, and I had extreme vertigo, I had to have intention behind it to say, I'm gonna practice. There's nothing else I can do. All I can do is lay here. So I'm gonna be with it and practice in that moment, and those moments that were strung together over the course of like a while for it to kind of leave. But my mind was still involved in it. I think there's other times maybe practice just kind of flows, and maybe, I guess it's not contingent of how we feel, right? It just is. But I'm wondering, I guess, as we practice more and for longer periods of time, we do at some point, we are the practice, right? Does that make any sense? I see it like in my mind, like my mind has to sometimes redirect back in order for me to show up in that moment. And then other times maybe it doesn't. But at some point maybe it won't show up at all.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. It's Pam, right? Is it?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, I recognize your voice, but I can't really see you. So, yeah, the idea of practice kind of melts away with everything else sometimes. I remember some years ago when I had a really bad flu like that, like for about a month, I was pretty out of it, yeah. And I struggled with it, and I was like wanting not to be that way because I was still fairly young, and should be healthy. This shouldn't be so hard. But I kind of, I would read some stuff and I realized that there's a state of being that accepts all of that, and that the light of that being is there even in the pain, in the lack of energy. And so just laying there, somehow there was an attitude that was still joyful. I don't know. I can't really explain it, but there was just not just allowing the raw emotion of the headache and the inflamed bronchial tubes and the sore throat, just allowing the sensations to just kind of do their thing. You practice with it, but the idea of practicing with it, of you doing the practice, that if we're not attached to the idea of doing it by ourselves, but allowing the power of all beings to kind of heal, even though it still hurts, there was an ease to it. There was kind of a kind of settlement to it, settling in. And I was kind of surprised that I was able to talk to people and still feel joyful, even though I couldn't really do anything, There was no energy to really do anything, but there was still just the joy of being that somehow, if you just allow it, it kind of shines through it. Does that make sense?
It does. I leaned
Yeah.
into it. I
Yeah.
leaned into it. I was like, I'm here for this. This is my life right now. I'm just wondering sometimes with practice longer that it's not something that has to pop up into my head to say, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
oh, I have to accept this and lean into it. It's just going to be acceptance. And that's just going to be the practice without the brain being involved in it.
Yeah, yeah. And then afterwards, when you're well, Thich Nhat Hanh said, appreciate your non-toothache. So appreciate your non-flu bug,
Celebrating.
Yeah, right, celebrate. Well, we're almost at the end of our time. Any announcements or?
Just our regular schedule on Saturday. And I hope to see everyone there on Saturday. We sit from 8 in the morning until 9:30 in the morning. And we have tea. That's the airport house.
Is Fusatsu next week? Gato?
Yes, next Wednesday is Futsatsu. I believe. It's Futsatsu. Is that the fourth Wednesday?
Uh-huh.
Then it is Futsatsu. So I remind everyone to please bring some canned food or boxed food for donations to the soup kitchen. Thank you, Jishan. I've got my days mixed up. Do you wonder why?
Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to transform them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to transform them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to transform them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable.